the podcast that cuts through the noise of the many policies and regulations that affect American agriculture. Each week, we pull back the curtain on the programs, policies, and perceptions shaping the agricultural community in rural America. If you've ever felt like something doesn't add up, you're not alone. I'm Jenny, and this is Smoking Mirrors. Let's make sense of the maze we call farm policy. Welcome to Smoke and Mirrors, the podcast where we make sense of agricultural policy. I'm Jennifer Ift. I teach agricultural policy at Kansas State University. I'm excited to be joined by Dallas Gerber of Growth Energy today. Dallas, thanks for joining me.
Jennifer, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very much looking forward to it. As you said, my name is Dallas Gerber. I'm with Growth Energy. We are the world's largest association of bioethanol producers. We represent 97 plants across the country and about 130 associate members, including groups like Renew Kansas and Kansas Corn. Together, our members, produce about 9.5 billion, maybe a little bit more gallons of ethanol a year. And we work with those plant members and with our associate members to ensure that policy that is beneficial to biofuels and to ethanol is implemented at the state and the federal level.
Well, a couple weeks ago, I was thinking of topics for the podcast, and I talked to some folks, and I was like, I still don't understand E15.
Sure.
And they actually said that you could make E15 entertaining. So are you up for the task?
Yes, I think so. Maybe not entertaining, but definitely informative and engaging.
I think, with policy, if you can get clear most of the time, that's
Sure.
a huge accomplishment.
Sure.
A lot of these policies are pretty complicated. But before we get into E15 and ethanol policy, let's start from the basics. What is ethanol? What is it used for?
Sure. Ethanol, really what it comes down to is it's an alcohol. It's produced from fermenting sugars or starches found in plants. One of our members, Tim Winters, who runs Western New York Energy in Medina, New York. Anytime, the last few times that we've been in meetings on Capitol Hill or at the State House, he would always, he and I love the way he says it, but he says, we're just basically a giant distillery. We're making alcohol that, is ethanol that is typically used in fuel, but you can also create at these distilleries and these refineries kind of higher grade beverage ethanol that gets sold to other distilleries and beverage makers. So primarily the use of ethanol produced by our members is for transportation fuel.
Right.
So,
right.
And it's been used as a transportation fuel for around 150 years. Around the mid 19th century is when it kind of popped up as a fuel, and they also used it as lamp fuel for a while. Kind of the turn of the century, the beginning of the 20th century, a lot of those kind of first generation vehicles ran on high ethanol content fuels. And so obviously that's changed over the years, but our goal is to advocate for a higher blend. So those, the main use is automobile fuels. You can also, one of the things that we saw in the pandemic, our members were able to kind of change tactics pretty quickly and start, they were, instead of fuel ethanol, they were able to produce kind of a higher grade health sanitizing, like hand sanitizer. Yeah, hand sanitizer, cleaning agents, things like that. And that was a really important way for our industry to help during the pandemic, and it was a way to keep the lights on.
That was that definitely. It was also quite fragrant, if I remember correctly. They got it out not in time to put any fragrances in it. So.
Right. Yeah. It was the original odor.
Yes, unscented.
Beyond just the ethanol, there is a pretty important number of co-products that are produced in the ethanol production process as well. As the sugars and starches are digested and fermented, it releases a whole lot of carbon dioxide, and a lot of our members have been able to capture that and sell it to food processors, to beverage makers for carbonation. It's important for the dry ice, to production of dry ice. And I'm not certain how. I'm not certain the process, but apparently CO2 can be used very effectively for water filtration for municipal sewer plants, things like that. So there's a lot of important co-products and uses in those co-products outside of just the ethanol, including distiller's grains, which is just the protein coming out. We use the starch and the sugar that leaves the protein, and that protein can be packaged as a distiller's grain, high nutrient animal feed that is actually easier for livestock to digest than just a kernel of corn.
Absolutely. A lot of our cattle producers use it
Yeah.
for sure here. So ethanol was one of the OG motor fuels in the US, is what it sounds like.
Mhm.
It's based on my reading, it's sort of, in the 70s when you had conflict in the Middle East, sort of started coming back. And policies always played a role in that. There's been congressional action.
Right.
The big policies were the renewable fuel standard in 2005 and 2007. You want to talk about that
Mhm.
a bit?
Sure. I'll start by, I guess, maybe pre-RFS. So like you said, the kind of reemergence of ethanol kind of happened during the late 70s with the OPEC and the oil crisis. And a lot of those policies in that time moving towards the RFS was really about centered around tax incentives and policies that required oxygenates to help the fuel burn cleaner. And that started a lot of that started in the late 70s era with the OPEC crisis. And then I think as we moved into the 90s and kind of closer to the RFS, amendments to the Clean Air Act actually required the use of an oxygenated gasoline in areas prone to smog, excessive pollution, and that blend was called RFG, or reformulated gasoline. And so, you know, the easiest way, especially now that it's the MTBE has been banned, the easiest way to get a cleaner burning oxygenate in your fuel is ethanol. It's an important, it plays an important role in those RFG markets. And interestingly enough, in those RFG markets, and it's major metropolitan areas like Los Angeles, Chicago, Philadelphia, Baltimore, things like that, New York, despite the year round, despite not being able to sell E15 year round, it is eligible for sale in those RFG markets because the RVP, the vapor pressure issues are not. It's in line with the E10 that gets sold there as well as RFG. So it kind of by definition falls under RFG and can be sold year round there. So and I think when you move into the early 2000s with the RFS, the renewable fuel standard, and really what it comes down to is it requires the blending of biofuels into the transportation fuel supply, and it sets a certain number of gallons that must be blended per year, called the RVO, the Renewable Volume Obligation. When the bill was passed and implemented, the first few iterations of those were set by law, like they were actually in statutory, in the statute, has since ran out, and that RVO set has shifted to the EPA's rulemaking process. So in the last few years, we've had our industry and our members have been strong advocates with the EPA and with the USDA and with others that are involved in the RVO rulemaking. And just recently, the most recent RVO came out, I think, about 2 weeks ago, and provided a pretty solid boost for renewable fuels in the United States and for ethanol. So within the RFS, there's different classifications of renewable fuels. Cornstarch ethanol is considered the conventional biofuel, and that falls under what they call a D6 RIN category, or renewable identification number. And so our advocates and will continue to advocate for larger volumes of those D6 RINs when EPA is setting those new obligations. So the most basic way to explain how they set that is the EPA will say this is the total number of gallons of renewable fuels that need to be blended in. And then let's say, I believe the most recent one was just north of 22 billion. And so you take your advanced biofuels and your bio-based diesel biofuels numbers, and you subtract that from that 22 billion. That number that's left is what's called the implied conventional biofuel obligation. That's those D6 RINs, which is basically ethanol. We're at a 15 billion gallon obligation in the new RVO that the EPA put out a couple weeks ago.
Okay. And so if we go back a little bit, and I want to discuss the blend wall, because I think that's something people hear about, is that the original use of biofuels envisioned in the renewable fuel standard, like we've never reached that because those sort of advanced biofuels or third generation biofuels still aren't cost effective. Is that?
I mean, that's not that is. I think it's cost effective. I would say is not entirely accurate. There's been some technologies and some scale. It's been difficult to scale up the production. We have a number of members that have focused a lot of time and a lot of research into those advanced biofuels, and they've been very successful. And those advanced biofuels will be They're very profitable in low carbon markets like the California's LCFS, other international markets that focus on low carbon fuels. I think the big hurdle, one of the hurdles for ethanol within the RFS as it's written today, is that by statute, cornstarch ethanol cannot qualify as an advanced biofuel, even if it hits the carbon reduction requirement. So, all cornstarch ethanol is a D6 RIN, and if the law were to change so that the ethanol could be classified as an advanced biofuel, provided it hits that 50% reduction, it can attain a D5 RIN, which would be a little bit more lucrative, a little bit more cost effective. And so part of it is the difficulty in scaling up the process. Another part of it is frankly a policy issue. If we have continuously advocated for that policy change so that ethanol that reaches that 50% or greater reduction in carbon, it should be able to compete at the same level as other biofuels.
So we have corn-based ethanol. That's the majority of ethanol that's produced. That sort of hit the blend wall, sort of at our current blends, E10, that's a 10% ethanol blend, plus, just the current fuel use, that's what makes the blend wall. You have increasing biodiesel, a lot of that's from soybeans, as well as other plant-based oils. On top of that, you've had advanced biofuels, which continue to be developed, but have not reached the potential for the original value mandated by Congress. Did I get it right this time?
Yeah, that sounds, but yeah, that's
Okay. Yeah, no, this policy is complicated for sure.
Indeed it is.
And so, so I think we've covered everything. All right. And I think ethanol is about 1/3 of U.S. corn production, not quite. Is that correct?
A little bit more, around 40%.
40%. Oh gosh. Okay. Yeah. So it's a lot of the acres of corn grown in the U.S. Do you know the soybean number?
Ooh,
That's
no,
gonna be lower, right?
I think that would be a little lower because the soy is typically used for a lot of like meal for cattle.
Yeah. Really most directly important for corn. So let's go back to the blend wall. That's what I can't figure out. So how long has E10 is widespread. You buy fuel for your vehicle, that's what you use nearly all of the time.
Right.
How long has sort of the biofuel industry been working on getting, I guess, what's the special authorization that's needed for E15? Why can't it just be widespread? And how long have you been working on that?
So we've been working on it for well before E15 was officially approved for use by the EPA. Okay. Realistically, the reason, I mean, the best way to explain it is E does not get that summer waiver that E10 does, basically simply because the Clean Air Act was written before E15 was a product.
Summer waiver again? So
the summer waiver is 10 gets an automatic, so with the Clean Air Act, 10 gets a waiver that's statutorily mandated for a higher vapor pressure fuel in those summer months, or a different vapor pressure fuel in those summer months. And that's automatically granted every year.
Okay, gotcha.
E15 does not get that because it was not a fuel, it was not a thing. It wasn't a product widely available for use or approved for sale when the Clean Air Act amendments were written. And so E15 relies on annual summer waivers, proactive measures from the EPA to allow for those year-round sales to continue. We had been working for many years on getting what we call the legislative fix for year-round E15. The first Trump administration tried to do it administratively, tried to do it through executive order. Unfortunately, the courts reversed that, saying it required legislative action. And that's been one of our top focuses in the last few years. We were very close to getting it done last year before kind of political posturing that had nothing to do with biofuels policy kind of sunk a large omnibus bill at the end of last year. The goal, the main goal now is for team to get that legislative approval for year-round sales, so that it's treated just like E10 under the Clean Air Act and under the RVP waivers, so that we can compete at a level playing field.
So it sounds like the E15 was in the spirit of the original legislation.
Yes.
And it's sort of been a decade now. Now, how much? So let's say it just becomes permanent law, and you can have E15 year round. How much does corn ethanol, or just how much of an increase in use would you see from that?
Well, we have done some studies on that over the years, and I might be off by, maybe 5 to 10%, but I'll put it this way: if we were to switch to E15 across the country, consumers would save about 20 to 21 billion, something like that, a year in
Does
fuel
that
costs.
depend? Sorry, what consumers would say what?
Would save nationwide would save about 20 to 21 billion,
What's
I
the cost?
believe.
Can you put that into a cost per gallon?
Anywhere from 10 to 30 cents less, more affordable per gallon.
Okay. And does that depend on the relative price of corn and gas?
That's relative price of corn, relative price of the gasoline portion of the gallon, price at the rack or price at the terminal that fuel retailers are paying, and then there's general avail.
Okay, gotcha. So there's savings for the consumer there. What about sort of on the production side? Would you see like how much extra corn or how much?
That's a number I do not have off the top of my head. Figure 20 billion, say 20 cents, doubling. If E15 were to replace E10, you'd be doubling or increasing by 50% the amount of corn that's blended. So,
That's a
you know,
lot.
that is, yeah, because you'd be going from 10% of each gallon to 15% of each gallon. So take,
Yeah,
that,
that's a lot. And do you
yeah.
think that would just go to that, or it kind of depend on the relative prices of corn and petroleum, or?
I mean, I think I don't think we would see an immediate switch from E10 to E15. We strongly advocate for consumer choice. Obviously, we don't. I think it would take some time to ramp up to that, and I think we're going to see that, for instance, in California, which is um, set to approve E15 sometime next year. So it's not like it wouldn't
Okay.
be a spigot that turns on, but because we've seen that. I mean, E15's been available for, since 2011, and we're just now approaching 5,000.
That would really help the US get near much closer to the original goal of the renewable fuel.
Yes,
Is what
yes.
it sounds like. Okay. And does this affect your vehicles at all?
No, I mean, not at all. There's, it's, I mean, there's no impact on your vehicle. In fact, ethanol is actually an effective octane booster for fuel. And so it's a more affordable fuel that improves octane, that reduces GHG emissions, that helps bolster the rural economy through the purchasing of corn. And it also helps improve American energy security and energy independence. So it's a win-win-win-win kind of situation where I think advocating for E15 and the increased use of E15 stands at this really, really interesting nexus of supporting the rural economy, of supporting energy independence, supporting lower prices for consumers, and also supporting, a responsible environmental policy,
Yeah.
environmental protection policy.
Right.
As you increase your ethanol content in the gallon, it decreases greenhouse gases and carbon emissions, and that's important to a lot of folks in the country.
Yep. I mean, so I teach agricultural policy, and we touch
Mhm.
on things that are controversial and relate to people's deeply held values. And I'm used to talking about that. And then when we talk about, I mean, there are different perspectives on ethanol and biofuels. But when we talk about E15, it never seemed like it was one of the more controversial things
Right.
that we were dealing with in ag policy. I mean, you have some people on sort of the environmental side who maybe would be
Mhm.
concerned about indirect land use change. There's different interests in the crops
Mhm.
and livestock sector.
Right.
These are kind of older ongoing policy debates. And then there's sort of the oil and gas sector, which
Mhm.
would have their own interests. And so what I've kind of had trouble seeing is with the politics, like how, this is a priority of a lot of, like, I guess ag, or at least crop producer interests. Like what are the politics? Like, why has this taken so long? That's where I'm seeing what the different levers are
Yeah,
being used.
I think firstly, I mean, just the wheels of government
Mhm.
typically just move very, very slowly. And oftentimes, we see at the state level where it takes a few sessions. If there's a pro biofuels piece of legislation that's been introduced, it might not see a floor vote, that first session. It might require, some socialization. It requires advocacy from groups like us and groups like Kansas Corn, Renew Kansas, to really help inform those policymakers before they can get comfortable with a floor vote, with debate,
Yep.
committee hearings. And
Yep.
so, the wheels of government typically move very slowly. Also, and with respect to like specifically biofuels and ethanol, frankly, for the longest time, the multitude of voices in the liquid fuel industry didn't always see eye to eye on E15, but that started to change over the last few years, and a variety of partners in the liquid industry are all swimming in the same direction. We're all rowing in the same direction. We all understand that there is opportunity for refiners, for ethanol producers, for corn growers, and for consumers with higher blends of ethanol. And so,
What's the liquid fuel industry?
uh,
Make sure.
so biomass-based diesel, petroleum interests, just all the liquid that goes into that
Okay,
goes into,
anything you put
yeah,
in a vehicle.
yeah, basically.
Okay. Gotcha.
So in the last couple of years, last few years, we've really understood that it's in everyone's interest to swim in the right direction, swim in the same direction.
Okay.
And it's been fairly successful. Our advocacy has been fairly successful. And like I said, we were close last year to getting the year-round E15 in
Do you think
legislation.
if you had a standalone bill in the House or Senate, do you have enough votes right now to
Yeah,
get
no,
it?
it's, as someone who has spent, before I started with Growth Energy, I worked on Capitol Hill for a few years, and very few bills like that actually end up getting put into, very few policies like that end up passing as a standalone bill.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, as we just saw recently with the one big beautiful bill, it
Yeah.
brings in a whole host of things. I mean,
Yep. Yep.
every Christmas or
Welcome
New
to farm
Year's,
now.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's definitely a lot of support both in the House and the Senate that is
Mhm.
bipartisan, that is, kind of spread across, regions. It's not just the Midwest. And while obviously our Midwest representatives on both sides of the aisle, they're the primary kind of cheerleaders and folks advocating for biofuels. So we do have advocates that are outside of the Midwest footprint. And so whether we could get a standalone bill passed, I don't
I'm
know.
not just,
Yeah,
do you have a
yeah.
majority of members of Congress that you think would vote with you?
I think we would. I think we would. I think when our members go to DC 2 or 3 times a year and do our fly-in days, and we talk to members, we don't just talk to the members that we already agree with or that already agree with us. We
Right.
talk to those that maybe don't, they don't have ethanol producers in their state. They don't grow a lot of corn in their state. And when we lay out the facts of why it's beneficial to their constituents in terms of the cost at the pump, why it's beneficial to the environment, why it's beneficial to American energy independence.
Yeah.
I mean, it tends to open eyes, particularly among policymakers that don't have an ethanol production or corn production footprint in their district.
Are there many members of Congress where, again, we have a big farm bill, we have the one big, I can't even say it, big beautiful bill act. Are there many members where this would be a wedge issue for them? This is you have to get this out of this bigger bill, so I'll vote for it. Are you think your
Saw
thing?
we saw a decent, we saw a lot of strong advocacy over the last few years of post Inflation Reduction Act that created a tax credit called the 45Z tax credit,
Yeah.
clean fuels production tax credit. We saw a significant number of members from the Midwest, basically, Speaker Johnson, that you know we can roll. We have to protect these tax credits that help the Midwest, help farmers, help protect and preserve American agriculture. Whether they issued ultimatums, I mean, you'd have to ask them. But I do know they stood strong. They were champions for us, and they made sure that when the House was voting on legislation that would repeal a good chunk of the Inflation Reduction Act, they fought hard and they fought successfully to keep that tax credit.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to do another episode on that, I think.
Sure.
But that was it's through 2029 in the big beautiful bill, right?
Correct. Yes. So,
Yeah.
I think I'll say the last few years have been really interesting in terms of the politics of biofuels. In the last few years, biofuels producers and ethanol producers, they were able to, several years ago, we were able to encourage a Democrat-controlled House and Senate to pass a clean fuels production tax credit that rewards ethanol producers and feedstock producers
Yeah.
for producing lower carbon fuels, for a lower carbon liquid fuel, which, at the time, I can't imagine there were a whole lot of folks that could have predicted that would be the case. And we were able to keep that, and we were able to preserve it. And then you fast forward a few years later and to, a couple of weeks ago, then we worked with the Trump administration and with the Republican controlled Congress to not only maintain a Biden era tax credit, but to extend it and expand it. And
Yep.
so, you know, we, I think that, I mean, alone, that ability right there, that instance of being able to defend, support, and champion legislation to both sides of the aisle shows the opportunities that we have as an industry, and the message that we have and how that message resonates.
Right, right. Understood. So wait, you said EPA has approved it? Let's go back.
So EPA approved E15
It's like
2011.
okay, but
Yeah.
more recently, like a month ago?
Uh, what you mean year-round E15?
Yeah. Or
No,
the
no.
summer waiver.
Yes, they did announce their summer waivers probably 2 months ago. I think it was late April, maybe early May. But yes, they announced that the E15 had got that summer waiver, and it can continue to be sold through September.
Okay. So do you think it'll continue? I mean, has this been an issue with the EPA before? Do they regularly issue these waivers?
They have there have been summers that they have not, but it's been, I think this is the 7th or 8th year in a row that we've gotten the waiver.
Okay.
And frankly, on day one of the Trump administration, I think it's not unreasonable to think that if we can't get tragically, we couldn't get that legislative fix done before the end of the Trump administration, it would not be out of the realm of possibility to have that summer waiver every year.
Yeah.
On day one of on day one of earlier this year, when Trump took office again, his executive order on energy security specifically mentioned biofuels, specifically mentioned year-round E15. I believe it mentioned year-round E15. Definitely, it referenced ethanol as part of the solution for American energy dominance. And that was the first time, to my knowledge, that's really been, we were part of the conversation up front. The president, after spending the time that he did in Iowa and on the campaign trail, understands the importance of biofuels, understands what it means to the rural economy, and his administration is ready and willing to fight for it.
Got it. So okay, so I'm gonna step back a little. I'm trying to find summarize the reasons why
Sure.
it's taken so long. Historically, there has been resistance from the petroleum industry.
Yes, I mean, I think it's there has been, but as I said,
you're working together more now.
Yeah, we're working together more now. Everyone would prefer a national fix. It would be preferable to have that nationwide legislative fix to allow for year-round sales of E15 rather than patchworks of some states allow it and some markets don't, right. And depends on smog levels and things like that.
And so, okay, so there's sort of that different industries have different interests. That's normal. And then you have, EPA, so you could have temporary fixes administratively, executive branch. And then you have the difficulty of getting any type of legislation through Congress.
Correct.
Do you think that sort of sums up? If people say, why hasn't this happened yet? Is that?
Yes, I think so. We see how fickle it can be when Congress is debating omnibus bills, and what gets, the bill dies a million times before it actually gets passed. And I think would be no exception to that, in the sense that it would be subject to the same laws of political reality as every other bill or issue. Despite what might sound like pessimism over whether and when we get year-round E15 done, I would think the future for liquid fuels, I think the future for biofuels and ethanols is pretty bright. I think there's a few things to consider why. As I mentioned previously, we got closer than ever last year to secure year-round E15. And while we didn't get it across the finish line, it was very, very close. And now that the future of 45Z has been secured through the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, we're now turning our sights to ensure that we can get year-round E15 done. Two, I think after years of resistance in California, that state, which is currently the only state where E15 cannot be sold, is on a path to E15 approval. Earlier this month, or I guess at the end of June rather, the governor signed into law a budget bills that provided funding for the approval process for E15. And that's going to open, once they get that done, that's going to open up it's going to open a market with huge potential for our members and for retailers. And third, as I mentioned, I think the fact that we were able to pivot from a Democratic controlled House and Senate to a Republican controlled House and Senate and White House, and preserve and expand and protect that incentive, that policy, shows the strength of our argument and shows the strength of our industry and the effectiveness of our members as advocates and as members of an association that really works hard to make sure that we're doing the best for our members.
Absolutely, absolutely. To tie it back to the theme, I mean, the work you do, I still haven't wrapped my head around RINs. These policies are complicated, but it's good to be able to talk to people who, you're in the weeds and you're in the thick of it and can really help explain what's going on and what matters in these processes. All right. Well, do you think I should do a future episode on sustainable aviation fuels?
I think so. Staff or whatever it's being called now, there's still a lot of questions around it in terms of its future and applicability, but it's definitely an important topic that we need to continue to discuss. So yes, I think an episode on sustainability.
Yep, absolutely. I'm still learning too. Well, thanks a lot for your time. I certainly learned a lot.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, I appreciate the time, Jennifer. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Smoke and Mirrors. If today made you think or see things a little differently, share it with someone who appreciates cutting through the noise. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for spending part of the day with us. Until next time, keep asking what matters.